77% of students in this country say they are victims of bullying. Cyberbullying numbers are on the rise as well. A recent nationwide survey found 43% of students that were surveyed said that they were cyberbullied. So how do we as parents deal with it if our kids are being bullied? How can we tell if it's happening if they aren't willing to tell us? So joining us now, Dr. Sasha Waring. He's a psychiatrist with Swedish Behavioral Health. Good to have you here this morning. So what do we do if our kid is being bullied, if we suspect they are being bullied? What can we do if we're not really getting a clear message from our teens and tweens? Because sometimes it's difficult to have that line of communication.
Sure. So teenagers sometimes will let us know directly what's going on. Oftentimes they won't. But if we have concern based on non-specific stuff, like they're not doing as well in school, they're complaining a lot about physical problems and not wanting to go to school because they say they're sick, but you don't think they're really sick, it might be bullying. There's a lot of other things that could be going on too. But on the topic of bullying, it'd be great to kind of give them an opportunity to let you know as a parent, like what's going on with their friends, what's going on with their activities, or anybody make them feel bad. And if ever that does come up, even if they're denying it initially, that you're always around and willing to listen and happy to help out.
What is considered bullying these days?
Yeah, so there's been various definitions put out there around bullying. I think of it in simple terms, and I think it can be useful to think of it this way. It's really any kind of repeated action by another person or group of people that's making somebody feel bad. And that can be physical bullying, like typical kind of traditional thought of as bullying, getting shoved into lockers, locked in a room, otherwise kind of more egregious physical acts, slapped in the back of the head, stuff stolen from you. But it can also be all different kinds of emotional and verbal affronts, and that can carry over into online messaging and like posting about somebody in a negative way.
Yeah, and that's where this has become a little insidious, because it's really hard to get a real handle on all of our kids' social media accounts. They think that that is their space, and we shouldn't be allowed to be in that space. But if there's bullying going on in that space, that could be really dangerous.
Sure, and it can be, sometimes there can be a fine line between what's bullying and what might be good-natured teasing or kind of thought of as normal teenage interactions.
So what's the line?
Yeah. I think it depends on the individual kid. There might be some cases where you can tell from the language or the actions that something is clearly kind of inappropriate and repeated and offensive, and your kid has asked that to stop and it continues. Okay. It also depends on how much it's affecting the kid, and so it can be hard to get a gauge on that, but talking with them about whether something is actually bothering them or whether they see it as good humor among friends is an important distinction. Okay,
so what advice would you give to parents of a kid that may be being bullied?
Sure. I think some of it depends on the context of where it's happening and whether this is something that's physical or verbal in person or it's happening online, as far as where you'd be thinking about intervening. Certainly if it's something that's happening at school, most schools, if not all schools now, have some kind of anti-bullying policies in place to kind of punish offenders and to follow up. It can be a challenge sometimes in school settings and in social groups to bring up the issue of bullying, especially when it comes from parents, because that sometimes can attract more negative attention on your kid or teenager if they're seen as like complaining or whistleblowing. But there should be mechanisms in place in most schools to watch out for that and make it really clear that if there's any retaliation for reporting more serious behaviors, that there will be more serious consequences on the kid.
It's so hard now, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's so complicated. Dr. Sasha Waring, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Sure.